On January 2nd, 1942, the 4th and 7th Guards Mortar Regiments parted with the heroically fought units of the 5th Cavalry Corps and the 1st Guards Rifle Division. In accordance with the order, our regiment was sent to the rear, to the area of the village Ruski Brod, from where it was to go to Voronezh. On that day, 10 kilometers southeast of Trudy-Meriavo, we had to force a small river with steep icy banks. The soldiers, literally on their hands with the help of ropes, lowered to the river and lifted each car to the other bank. Drivers, and not only them, were exposed to danger. There were cases when a car broke off, rolled down, dragging people with it. Then the command was given: drop the ropes. Move to the side.
To create footrests, warriors used axes, crowbars, pickaxes to dig grooves and holes. But how to ensure the wheels' grip on the ground? Not to loosen the icy downhill and uphill slopes? It required a lot of time, and we did not have it.
By the sounds of cannonade, it was felt the front was inexorably approaching. Enemy air raids became more frequent, but thanks to the fire of our anti-aircraft batteries and dispersal of vehicles, we had almost no losses. A strict order was maintained at the crossing. The rigs came here on a signal. The thought was disturbing: what if enemy tanks break through in our direction? Without shells, without anti-tank means, we with our vehicles were helpless. By the end of the day, we managed to cross all the vehicles. The commissar and I, breathing a sigh of relief, got into a pickup truck and rushed to catch up with our regiment. Ruski Brod turned out to be a large village, where our guardsmen had already settled in warm houses for rest. We also wanted to rest. But an officer of the task force headquarters, Guards Major Makiv, was already waiting for us with a written order to urgently present conclusions and proposals for the combat use of RS units based on the regiment's experience. I had to sit down for a report. In it, I wrote, SMF divisions are a powerful firepower of massive artillery fire, can be successfully used in defense, offensive and pursuit. They are the most effective means of destroying and suppressing mortar and artillery batteries and manpower in places of its concentration. Divisions, as a rule, should be attached to divisions, in exceptional cases to regiments in especially critical directions. They should be fired with 4 to 6 shells. In special cases, combat vehicles can be used for direct fire, with quick departure to firing positions and immediate withdrawal to cover after a volley. In the staff of the division should be introduced a communication department with the infantry and increase the wire communication line by 10 kilometers. It is necessary to introduce a weather service department into the regiment's staff. It is desirable in the regiment to have a 76mm battery and a squad to cover firing positions.
Manufacturers should eliminate the design flaws of combat vehicles to reduce the minimum angle of elevation and increase the horizontal angle of rotation, as well as to test at firing ranges of shells on the high explosive effect.
I must say that some of the proposals we put forward were later confirmed by other unit commanders, introduced into the practice of combat operations GMCH, taken into account in the improvement of combat vehicles. A new weapon was born. The tactics of its combat use was born. January 3rd, 1942, early in the morning, Major Makiv, with my report, left for Voronezh, and our regiment on the same day redeployed first to Arkhangelskoye and then also to Voronezh. No sooner had we fully deployed on the outskirts of the city than we received an order from Colonel Zubanov to urgently send the defective combat units with their commanders and drivers to the repair plant, and the defective transport vehicles to the mechanical workshops of one of the garages in the city. At the same time were handed out orders to repair the equipment.
We were then for the first time fortunate enough to have a close encounter with the workers of the rear. Workers of these enterprises within 2 days did, it seemed, impossible.
In the evening of January 9th, I and my commissar were summoned to the headquarters of the task force. We expected a beating for late submission of conclusions on the combat use of Katyushas, for the outbreak of influenza epidemic in the regiment, for a large number of defective vehicles. I don't know what else commanders and commissars of units get for. However, we were warmly welcomed at the headquarters, offered to undress, and go to a spacious room with a large table covered with kumacha. Here were already the commander and commissar of the 7th Regiment, officers of the headquarters and rear of the task force. Colonel Zubanov, Major Voznyuk, Regimental Commissar Zhukov, and Senior Battalion Commissar Kizelev entered the room. Zubanov read the decree of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR on the awarding of missileers. By this decree, along with others, the regiment commissar and I were awarded. It was our second high government award. We received the Order of Lenin in Lysychansk for the battles near Dykhanka and Kharkov, and now we were awarded the Order of Red Banner for the battles together with the 5th Cavalry Corps of General Kryuchenkin. F.N. Zhukov and A. K. Kizelev, members of the Military Council, warmly and cordially congratulated all the awardees. We also congratulated each other. After awarding the medals, Zubanov announced the order of the front commander, according to which the units of the group on January 12, 1942, was ordered to go to reinforce the 38th Army, 3rd Guards Cavalry Corps and the 6th Army.
The 3rd Division of the 4th Regiment and the 5th Division of the 7th Regiment under my command went to the 38th Army, the 1st and 2nd Divisions of our regiment under the command of Commissar Radchenko to the 6th Army. The remaining divisions of the 7th Regiment to the 3rd Guards Cavalry Corps. But since the 1st Division of our regiment had the greatest losses, he temporarily remained in Voronezh for repairs. It turned out that the regiment was torn into 3 parts.
The scattered nature of the divisions made it difficult to provide them with ammunition, fuel, food, clothing and financial allowances, as well as car repair facilities. Record keeping and reporting became especially difficult. It was difficult to write off in a timely manner the property that had fallen into disrepair or was lost in the battles. The commanders of the units and formations we supported could not help us in any way, as we were not part of their staffs. In February 1942, 2 of our divisions supported one of the divisions of the 38th Army defending the approaches to Bulat-Slavka station. The winter of 1942 was unusually severe. Snowstorms covered the roads. Combat units stood on the main firing positions in snowy ramps in full combat readiness. Not far from them in deep trenches were vehicles with ammunition. Because of the frequent snowfalls and pozemok, we were confined to the firing positions. With great difficulty, the guardsmen were able to clear access routes for the delivery of food, shells and fuel. When I arrived in the area Bulat-Slavka, I immediately went to the head of artillery of the army, Colonel M. I. Gorbunov. He was a knowledgeable artilleryman, a calm and judicious man. "I am very pleased with your arrival," he said. "I know that your artillery is secret. I know your strict instructions. However, our divisions are defending on a wide front. You must throw the enemy off with your volley. I'm not ordering you, but asking you to keep your divisions at firing positions in full readiness. From waiting positions because of the drifts, they will not be able to arrive in time to open fire." Even without this request, it was clear to me that maneuver was impossible. Therefore, the divisions and took the battle order, buried in the snow, as well as all the barrel artillery. Being in firing positions, the combat units and vehicles with shells were in readiness to move. No water was drained from the radiators and periodically turned on the engines. Guardsmen were continuously clearing access routes. This exhausted the men, led to overconsumption of fuel, to premature wear of vehicles. But there was no other way out. We were watching the enemy. As soon as we noticed a suspicious revival in one or another area, we fired volleys. However, saving shells, we mostly fired by batteries. Only in some areas there were short artillery raids and divisional volleys, after which the advanced rifle battalions attacked the enemy. We had no great success from such private operations, but our actions upset the enemy's plans. The division commanders and I were constantly at an observation post or firing position. Communication with headquarters was difficult. We had no horses, and it was impossible to get to Bulat-Slavka by car. Transportation of ammunition, food and fuel was provided only by columns of 5 to 10 vehicles with teams of pushers and clearing roads. Tularemia and colds appeared in the divisions. Great physical overload and hypothermia had an impact. I had to give permission to my assistant on logistical support, Captain M.D. Dimanenko, to buy food from the local population. In the hard days of February, snowstorms on 2 carts to Bulat-Slavka came Colonel Zubanov with a group of officers. Their arrival was reported to me by telephone by Major R.R.R. Vasilevich, who now became the Chief of Staff of the regiment instead of Captain I. Gromov. He said that the state of the regiment's economy and the work of support services would be checked. Vasilevich also reported that Colonel Zubanov ordered me to arrive urgently in Bulatyslavka.
From the NP to Bulatyslavka, about 12 kilometers. The roads were covered with snow. There was nothing to think about traveling by automobile. For the second week I traveled on skis. This is the fastest way to travel from observation points to firing positions.
For me, skiing is my native element. Back in 1935, I led a 1,000-kilometer run of a detachment of cadets of the Tomsk Artillery School. The distance of 1,070 kilometers we passed for 11 walking days. The average daily passage was 97 kilometers. We arrived at the start without a single straggler. This transition was marked by order of People's Commissar of Defense Key Voroshilov. And 2 weeks later I participated in the district competitions at a distance of 50 kilometers, in full equipment, with shooting at the 48th kilometer. I then set an all-army record. I did not give up skiing until the war. Therefore, to overcome 12 kilometers, even in full equipment, was not difficult for me. Besides, my travelling companion was a regimental Dr. Kolya Kolmanskik, an excellent skier. His service was to be checked, and he too was in a hurry to Bulatyslavka. We arrived in Bulatyslavka late. Zubanov and the officers who had arrived were already asleep. Only officers of our headquarters were awake, preparing references and materials. Vasilevich reported that it was planned to check the condition of vehicles, financial and food services, medical and sanitary condition of the regiment.
And what was said about the combat activity of the divisions? I asked.
We are accused of failing to fulfill the instructions of the group headquarters, answered Vasilevich. Our headquarters should not be in Bulatyslavka, but in Kupiansk at the army headquarters, so that it was possible to report daily at set hours to Moscow on the actions of the divisions and inform about the situation in the army section. Yes, there is a major conversation to be had, I thought. In the morning, as I expected, we had a serious conversation with Zubanov and Voznyuk regarding the location of the regimental headquarters. I argued that the regiment commander and his headquarters cannot be in 30 kilometers from the fighting order, in the deep rear. It is necessary to lead the battle, to manage the fire, to link the interaction with the infantry and artillery, to make the best use of the firepower of their divisions, I argued hotly. The commander must not only know, but also see how his divisions and batteries fulfill combat tasks. I was convinced that our artillery is special. The regiment operates subdivisionally at long distances, so its commander still cannot be simultaneously at the NP of each division, and he should not replace the division commanders. It was argued to me that being at the army headquarters, the regiment commander will be able to better organize the provision of all kinds of allowances and monitor the proper use of its divisions, and the regimental headquarters will timely inform the group headquarters about the combat work and needs of the regiment. Maybe you are right, but I do not understand it, I answered Zubanov. I am an artilleryman and, moreover, a regimental commander, not a staff officer. And if a division gets into trouble and leaves the enemy material part, who will be responsible? Obviously, the commander and commissar of the regiment.
If you put your divisions in the heat of the moment and keep constantly in firing positions without roads to them, as you do now, then for the loss of military equipment will be judged by you, wherever you are, said Zubanov.
3 days later, the inspection of the regiment and Valchenko's division services was over. In the conduct of the regimental economy was found many serious shortcomings, but deliberate abuse was not noted. The best case was in the division Valchenko, this independent in combat and economic terms of the military unit, always acting compactly. A separate division was not torn into parts, as our regiment. Being under my command, the division received fuel, food and shells through the rear of the regiment. Divisions of the regiment, on the other hand, without economic and technical services, experienced great difficulties. Experience showed that our divisions should be transferred to the staff of individual.
By the end of the Commission's work, the blizzard had subsided. Through the efforts of the division and army sapper units were cleared the road from the front line to Bulatyslavka. Zubanov ordered to withdraw the divisions to Bulatyslavka and a farm 3 kilometers south of it to keep them in waiting positions.
At night, the divisions withdrew from firing positions, and with great difficulty began to move to the waiting area. When the columns were already approaching Bilatslavka, suddenly again broke out a blizzard of unprecedented strength for these places. Valchenko's division, which was ahead, managed to pull up the vehicles on the northeastern outskirts of Bilatslavka, and Kudiak's division, which was to concentrate in the farm, could not get there. A kilometre from the farm, the column got stuck in the snow. The road snowed instantly. Any efforts to clear the way were fruitless. For several hours the division's vehicles were covered with snow. By the middle of the day the blizzard subsided as suddenly as it had begun. Kudiak came to the regiment headquarters on foot, wet, tired, stooped. He reported. The division was completely buried. Where are the men? Is everyone alive? People in the farm are resting. All are alive, but not all are healthy. They are sick with that damned tularemia.
How is the food organised? I asked.
It's easier now the regiment's food store is nearby. We brought food, and we will cook in the houses.
Zubanov postponed his departure for 24 hours. In the morning a strong wind had so compacted the snowdrifts that it was possible not only to pass through them, but also to ride a horse. The way of the group of inspectors lay through the farm near which Hudiak's division was stranded. Up to this farm I accompanied Zubanov. We saw an incredible picture. The huts were buried up to the roofs. Only chimneys and tree tops were sticking out. On the road, instead of the column of military installations, there were blackened roofs of cabins and something like shalashes. It was visible from the snowdrifts the ends of the trusses of the guiding combat vehicles, covered with tarpaulin covers. When we saw all this, Zubanov said in surprise.
What a blizzard. It's lucky we didn't leave that night. As soon as people have rested, start pulling off the cars and pull them up to the farm. The headquarters to move to Kupiansk. Warmly bidding farewell, as if there were no disputes between us, Zubanov and the members of the commission went on their own route, and Kudiak and I went to the farm to the guards. Returning to the headquarters, I felt very sick, dizzy, nauseous. I was stricken with tularemia. I had to stay in bed for 5 days. 10 days later the road was cleared, and we moved to Kupiansk with the regiment headquarters and rear. On arrival I reported to the Chief of Army Staff, Kol. P. Ivanov. With Semyon Pavlovich we studied together at the Frunze Academy, at the same faculty, in the same training group. At first he was a commander of the training department, and then a petty officer of the course. SP. Ivanov studied excellently, especially brilliantly in military history and tactics. We had good relations with him. I respected him for his straightforwardness, exactingness and humanity. There were times when we prepared for exams together. Our families were also friends. I introduced myself to Ivanov strictly according to the regulations. When he saw me, he greeted me warmly and said, "Sit down and tell me about yourself, where and what you have been doing these years." We recalled our studies at the academy, classmates and teachers. We talked about everyday affairs. Semyon Pavlovich inquired about the state of the regiment, and then reported that it was decided to concentrate it entirely on the right flank of the army in the area of Bely Kolodez. We had 2 or 3 days to prepare for the march. On the 3rd day the regimental headquarters from Kupiansk and divisions from Bilatslavka moved to Bely Kolodez. At this time the right flank units of the 38th Army were preparing for battle for the settlements of Rubishni and Stary Soltov, which spread out on the high western bank of the Seversky Donets. It was extremely necessary to take them to ensure the capture of the bridgehead on the outskirts of Kharkov. 3 to 5 kilometers south of Belogo Kolodez in the farmstead of the State Farm was placed the field office of the 38th Army. A few days later from the north, from the section of the 21st Army, through Volchansk, 2 divisions of our regiment, headed by Commissar Radchenko, arrived in Bely Kolodez. At last our regiment came together. We were happy about this reunion. Without wasting a minute, the command and political staff of the divisions got involved in the work, brought order in accounting and reporting, organised repair and preventive maintenance of combat vehicles, replenished the stock of shells and fuel. We summarised the results of combat operations of the divisions, shared experiences. Radchenko told me the story of how he was let down by the Kursk magnetic anomaly. "After this case," said Radchenko, "I was convinced that it exists. And the case was like this. The commander of the artillery of the 6th Army, Colonel D. I, Turbin, set Radchenko the task of destroying the enemy in one of the settlements. But Turbin forgot to warn the commissar about the magnetic anomaly. Radchenko himself checked the initial data and was absolutely sure of success, reported on the readiness of the division to open fire. Radchenko gave the command. Check the installations. Fire. All tensely looked at the target. How did you aim the combat vehicles? Suddenly asked Turbin. As usual, with the help of an artillery bussel, answered Radchenko. Turbin grabbed his head. What have you done? Magnetic anomaly. You can't use a bussel here. You have to shoot only on the angle meter. Radchenko shouted.
Stop. Hold your fire. But it was too late. There was a friendly volley. Seconds passed. By the noise of flying shells, Commissar and all present at the observation post realized that the irreparable happened. The shells were flying in a different direction. Fortunately, the volley was still in enemy territory, near a village, which was 1.5 kilometers from the front line.
From the site of the neighbouring division, Turbin, by telephone, soon reported that from the area where the volley was given, the enemy withdrew and left the village, which was taken without a fight reconnaissance of the front battalions. Reported also about the large losses of the enemy in manpower and equipment that captured prisoners. Turbin ordered the artillery battery, which was not far from the firing position of the division, to shoot the target and pass the data to Radchenko. A new powerful salvo inflicted huge damage to the Hitlerites and forced them to withdraw. Our units moved forward by several kilometers, seized a favorable line and began to improve the defense. True, for further offensive we had neither forces nor means. However, the enemy did not dare to attack in this direction. Soon the commander of artillery of the front, Major General N.V. Gavrilenko, an energetic, brave man, a very experienced artilleryman, came to us in Bely Kolodes. The general brought us glad tidings. By the decree of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR on March 13th, 1942, the regiment was awarded the Order of the Red Banner for successful combat operations. Our regiment was the 1st Guards Mortar Regiment, honoured with a high government award. The general visited all divisions, talked to the guardsmen, was interested in the combat readiness of batteries, gave practical advice. By his attention and sensitivity he had a favourable attitude to himself, although outwardly he seemed somewhat harsh. After acquaintance with the regiment he told me and the commissar about the plan of a private operation to capture a bridgehead on the western bank of the Seversky Donets. Since there was not enough artillery, Gavrilenko placed special hope in this operation on our regiment and Valchenko's division. We were talking in the barracks during lunch. Suddenly the observation post transmitted.
I sat opposite the general at the table and waited for his command to go into cover. Gavrilenko, as if nothing had happened, calmly ate. Looking at him, Radchenko and I also continued to eat. A few seconds later there was a heartbreaking whistle of flying bombs, followed by a series of powerful explosions. The ground trembled, the dilapidated barracks shook, plaster fell from the walls and ceiling, and the blast wave blew out all the glass. 50 meters away from the barracks there were 2 huge craters framed by blocks of frozen ground. Find out if there are any casualties, Gavrilenko asked, and added nonchalantly, it's a bit cold without windows. We should cover them with something.
The plaster and broken glass were removed. A lamp was brought. The windows were covered with blankets, and we put on overcoats. Gavrilenko looked at me slyly. Well, Commander, the airplanes have left. Let's continue lunch. The adjutant came in. Comrade General, several barracks were damaged. There are no dead, there are wounded. Having heard the report, the general asked, have you opened the slits? Of course, I answered. Why didn't you order us to take cover? Comrade General, I did not find it possible to do so. I was waiting for your command. As a general, it is not proper for me to run for cover first, he answered, and jokingly added, I will not come to you from now on. You do not take care of your superiors. Leaving us, Gavrilenko recommended to urgently find a place and withdraw the regiment from Belogo-Kolodizia. The next day we received a combat order from the army headquarters to concentrate the regiment's divisions in the forest, 8 kilometers northeast of Rubishni. That day I received a telegram from Colonel Zubanov. It ordered me to leave immediately for Moscow. The telegram said that until the arrival of Major Voroboyov, who should replace me, the regiment will be commanded by Radchenko. I was lost in speculation about the reason for the call. In addition, it was hard to part with my comrades in arms and native regiment. Army Commander General K. S. Moskalenko ordered me by phone to arrive at his command post, which was located near Belogo-Kolodizia. As soon as I appeared on the threshold, he asked me, "Do you know about the summons to Moscow?" "Yes, I know, Comrade General." "Well, that's fine. In that case, surrender the regiment and God be with you. Thank you very much for your combat work." But I didn't have to leave right away. When I arrived at the regiment to say goodbye, I was told that there was a battle in Rubishni. General Rusyanov's 1st Guards Division was fighting there, supported by Valchenko's and Kudiak's divisions. I went to the place of fighting. On the northwestern and northern outskirts of Rubishni there were street battles. The fascist command, striving to retake this important settlement, pulled up fresh reserves. The enemy launched furious counterattacks from the adjacent forest. He managed to capture the western and northwestern outskirts of Rubishni. Continuous rifle and machine gun fire was accompanied by flashes of flares. And suddenly there was pitch blackness, which was cut only by bright lines of tracer bullets. The calculations of anti-tank guns, brought to direct fire, did not know where to shoot. To give a volley on the outskirts of the village, and the adjacent forest cannot in the evening there stood their own. Communication with the forward battalions was broken. During the flash of the flare I saw General Rusyanov standing in the middle of the street and the head of the division's political department, Battalion Commissar Filyashkin, whom I had known since the Finnish campaign. "Comrade General." "Why aren't you in hiding?" I shouted. "Until we knock out the enemy from Rubishni, I'm not going anywhere," said Rusyanov firmly, looking into the darkness. "Rusyanov's division is not retreating." "Persuade him to go at least around the corner," Filyashkin said to me quietly. At last we managed to persuade the general to go behind the nearest house. Fortunately there was a stone semi-basement, from which we could keep watch no worse than from the street. General Rusyanov announced that in this house would be his observation and command posts, his headquarters, and ordered to organize urgent communication with the advanced battalions. "Do you know General Rodimtsev?" Rusyanov asked me. "I know him. We studied with him on the same course at the academy," I answered. "His division is coming to our aid. I ask you to meet it and ask Rodimtsev to speed up the advance. It will be hard for him and us if he is late."
My adjutant and I jumped out of the cellar and ran down the street to my car. The column of the division met about 5 kilometers from Rubishni. At its head rode on horseback a group of officers. Rodimtsev was among them.
"Comrade General, you need to speed up the advance of the regiments, deploy them on the move and strike a blow in the flank of the attacking enemy. That's General Rusyapov's request." In the light of the headlights of our car, Rodimtsev looked at the map and gave the order to speed up the movement, and showed me the deployment line of the head regiment and the direction of its attack. I returned to Rubishni and reported to Rusyanov that Rodimtsev's division was approaching. "Lieutenant Colonel, your Katyushas can help us now," said Rusyanov cheerfully. "2 divisions are ready at firing positions," I answered, "but we need to know exactly where our infantry is so as not to cover our own." "I see," said the general. And so, as the infantry positions were clarified, our batteries began to come into action. In about 40 minutes we fired a salvo of M8 batteries on the Grove, from where the fascists counterattacked, then on the approaches to the western outskirts of Rubishni. We, as always, did not have enough shells, and we were forced to fire very sparingly. Rodimtsev's division arrived in time, and by dawn the situation was restored and the front stabilized. Having said goodbye to Rusyanov and Filyashkin, I drove to the waiting positions of the divisions. There I bade farewell to the guards, thanked them warmly for their excellent combat work, and wished them success in the upcoming battles. Then I went to Bailey Colades, to the regiment headquarters, and from there by train to Voronezh, to the headquarters of the operational group of the Guards mortar units of the Southwestern Front. At the headquarters first met me Major Makiv. "Come into the secret part," he said. "Today I received an order concerning you." By order of the People's Commissar of Defense on March 25, 1942, I was awarded the military rank of Guards Colonel. An hour later, having said goodbye to Colonel Zubanov, I left for Moscow. Arriving in Moscow, I stayed at the hotel of the CDK. It was March 1942. The capital lived a busy life of wartime. Plants and factories were clearly working. From early morning until late evening, the streets were moving cars, trucks, black and camouflaged Demkas, and sometimes columns of cars. As darkness fell, balloons would rise into the sky, and the entire city would be plunged into darkness. Strictly observed light camouflage. The headquarters of the Guards mortar units of the Supreme Command Headquarters was located in the second house of the People's Commissariat of Defense on Red Square. There I arrived at 11 o'clock in the afternoon. Adjutant reported me to the commander of the Guards mortar units of the Supreme High Command, Deputy People's Commissar of Defense, Lieutenant General V.V. Oborenkov. V. Oborenkov. I was invited to the spacious office of the commander. There, in addition to Oborenkov, a mobile, tall, russet-haired general with a quick, shrewd look, were members of the Military Council, Lieutenant General Par Dekjechayev, Major General L.M. Gaidukov, and Secretary of the Moscow City Party Committee N.P. Firyubin. Oborenkov introduced us. "We decided to appoint you head of the inspection department," said Oborenkov. "You have gained enough combat experience. It's time to transfer it to newly formed regiments and units on other fronts. So don't worry, you won't stay in Moscow." "I will try to justify your trust," I replied. Then Oborenkov invited everyone to have tea with breadcrumbs. During the tea party, in a small room adjacent to the office, the commander asked me about the situation on the Southwestern Front, about the state of the regiment, about the difficulties we had to meet. I reported on the last battle of Rashanov's division for Rubishni and, taking the opportunity, suggested that the staff of the regiment should be changed. "The divisions operate separately all the time and have no supply bodies," I said. "They should be transferred to the staffs of separate divisions, otherwise it is too difficult for the regiment's services to provide them with all kinds of allowances." "We have thought about it," Oborenkov interrupted me vividly. "We are preparing calculations and reasonable proposals to the General Staff."
Generals Dekjechayev and Gaidukov also asked me a lot of questions. They were interested in the moral and political condition of the regiment's personnel and party political work in the battle, and my relationship with the Commissar, and much more.
Dekjechayev spoke loudly, clearly. His typically Russian face with a slightly upturned nose was very lively. Gaidukov seemed younger than the others. However, he held himself, like everyone else, confidently, strictly, and with dignity. When the light breakfast was over, the commander, standing up first from the table, said to me, "Well, good luck. First of all, I advise you to familiarize yourself with the structure of our apparatus. Study the staff, which is the formation of units, and of course the tasks of the inspection department, and then get to work. Time is of the essence, it's war." Familiarizing myself with the structure of the management of the commander of the Guards mortar units, I learned that the 1st batteries and regiments of field rocket artillery were directly subordinate to the Stavka. Material and technical support and management of their combat training in August 1941 was entrusted to the head of the main artillery directorate, and on September 8, 1941, the State Defense Committee decided to create special management bodies of field reactive artillery headed by the commander and the Military Council of the Guards mortar units. The commander of the Guards mortar units, aka Deputy People's Commissar of Defense, reported directly to the Supreme High Command. He was responsible for the formation and combat training of units, for providing them with weapons, vehicles and ammunition. He also controlled the combat use of this new type of artillery, was responsible for the preservation of military equipment and ammunition. The commander of the Guards mortar units was also subordinate to the main armament directorate. It was headed by an enterprising and erudite specialist Major General of Engineering and Technical Service, N.N. Kuznetsov, an exceptionally caring and attentive person. Later, when I had to command the operational groups of the Guards mortar units of the fronts, I especially felt his care for our units and attention to their needs. Chief of Staff of the commander of the GMCH was General A.A. Bykov, a man of enviable calmness and prudence. He always had exhaustive data on the Guards mortar units, the number of regiments, their condition and location. Operations and Inspection Department of the headquarters was headed by Colonel P.G. Lubintsev. He immediately brought me up to speed, told me about the peculiarities of the work of the headquarters and the Inspectorate Department. I remembered Major I.P. Tronov, a sociable and attentive officer of the headquarters. He had an outstanding memory and knew perfectly the officers of the units. Since 1944, Tronov commanded the 66th Guards Mortar Regiment. Only after I learned the nature and peculiarities of the work of the apparatus of the commander of the Guards Mortar units, it became clear to me why V.I. Wozniak so insistently demanded that the headquarters of the regiment was at the Army headquarters. However, the experience of further combat operations showed that for the timely transfer of necessary data to Moscow, it is not necessary to keep the entire regimental headquarters at the Army headquarters. For this purpose, it is enough to send trained communication officers to the headquarters of armies and fronts in time. Back in September 1941, the State Defense Committee decreed the creation of operational groups of Guards mortar units of the fronts. The command of these groups was charged with directing the combat activities of all the Guards mortar units at the disposal of the front, providing them with ammunition, weapons, organizing the repair of combat and transport vehicles. These groups controlled the combat training and were responsible for the combat readiness of the units, were responsible for the preservation of combat equipment and ammunition. The chiefs of operational groups reported directly to the commanders of the fronts at whose disposal they were located, at the same time closely cooperating with the artillery commanders. The first task forces were established on the Northwestern, Southwestern, Southern Bryansk and Leningrad fronts. In October 1941, during the Battle of Moscow, the Leningrad Operational Group was reorganized into the Operational Group of the Western Front. The task force consisted of a commander and one or two members of the military council, a headquarters, an artillery supply department, an artillery depot, a motor pool, a sanitary unit, and a mobile repair shop. There were no military councils in other branches of the troops at the front. The presence of military councils in the task forces of the Guards mortar units of the fronts testified to the special attention of the Central Committee and Stavka of the Supreme High Command to this new type of troops. Of the entire staff of the Inspectorate Department at that time in the headquarters were only my deputy, Lieutenant Colonel A.A. Moskovtsev and Major I. Lyubimov. The rest were on business trips. One morning, Lieutenant Colonel Moskovtsev dumbfounded me with an unexpected proposal. "Comrade Colonel, there's an opportunity to get tickets to the Red Army Theatre. Would you like them?" I've been to the theatre for a long time. That's how life worked out. After graduation from the academy, I served in the town of Rikitsa, fought on the Karelian Isthmus, later the border town of Vyacheslav and Belarus again, from the first day of the war at the front. That same evening, with the permission of the Chief of Staff, we went to the theatre with Moskovtsev. But alas, this time I was not destined to enjoy the play of artists. Near our fourth row stood an officer of the staff. He quietly said to me, "Comrade Colonel, the commander urgently summons you." I had to say goodbye to Moskovtsev. 20 minutes later, I was in the office of the commander of the Guards mortar units. There were already members of the military council Degtyarev and Gaidukov. General Laborenkov immediately got down to business. "Comrade Nestorenko, you must leave tomorrow morning to the headquarters of the Northwestern Front, to the task force of General Bazanov. He arrived there recently, he must be helped. His regiments are shattered by division, scattered over long distances and mixed up. The bad weather has hampered supply. Sort it out and report what can and should be done." The commander stood up from the table, walked around the office. Here's something else. On your arrival, be sure to report to the front commander, General Kurochkin, and a member of the military council, Bulganin. Ask for their help in providing the regiments with fuel and food. Convince them that the divisions should be gathered into their regiments and taken to a safe place. At the 4th hour of the morning, with a driver from the operative group of YP, Bazanov, on a skittish Gazik, we were already rushing along the Leningrad highway to the Northwestern front. The spring of the 42nd was early. Up to Kalinin the road was relatively good, but the farther away the worse it became. The places around were low-lying, swampy. The surface of the highway could not withstand a large flow of heavily laden cars. The asphalt had dips and holes in it, and in some places it had swollen. When a truck hit the dips with its wheels, it immediately sat on the duffer. It was more difficult to pull it out than from the thickest and most viscous mud. It had to destroy the asphalt even more. Then only a tractor could pull the car out. Many sections of the road were covered with a thick layer of brushwood covered with earth, and the roadsides were dug with cross-drainage ditches. All of this made driving difficult. In some places it was easier to drive off the road on the spreading soil. On the way we had an unpleasant experience. The driver noticed that the engine began to heat up quickly. It turned out that the crankcase plug had been lost and all the oil had leaked out. There was no spare plug. They decided to try to find the lost one. To do this, we had to walk back along the trail of leaking oil. After about a kilometre, the oil trail broke off. At this point, we started looking for a small metal plug, using our hands to carefully go over each bar of the decking. To our delight, we did find it. We poured oil into the crankcase again and moved on our way. On the second day, we arrived at the front headquarters. Front Commander General P. A. Kurochkin and General Y.P. Bazanov were at that time on the left wing of the front. In the headquarters of the task force of the Guards mortar units, I found the newly appointed Chief of Staff, Colonel A. Yarovoy. He and I were on the same course at the academy. He arrived at the Northwestern front a few days ago. Before that, in Moscow, we met him by chance. Yarovoy was summoned to the personnel department of the Guards mortar units for negotiations. Then he asked me what kind of troops they were and whether I should agree to a new assignment. I am a corps artilleryman, and here they offer me some unknown artillery, he said. I recommended him to agree without hesitation. And so we met again. Yarovoy was the first to tell me that the supply of units was interrupted, that there were alarming radiograms about the lack of shells and food. At the same time, the enemy, controlling the highway going from the west to Demyansk, intensified its actions. Our troops failed to close the ring of the encircled fascist group in the Demyansk area. Guards mortar regiments of P. V. Shutov, AAA Nalbandov and Gi Martinov were without shells. After talking with Yarov, I immediately went to report to a member of the military council of the Frontline, Bulganin. He received me in a friendly manner. He complained about the early spring and the lack of roads, told me about the measures that had been and were being taken to help the regiments behind the Lovov River. This help consisted in dropping food and ammunition, mainly ammunition for rifles and machine guns, to them by parachute. Attempts were made to drop boxes with rocket shells by parachute, but many of them fell into swamps and lakes. And those that could be found in the forest, it cost a lot of labour to drag to the firing positions. Besides, the shells fell into the water and became unusable. On the day of my arrival, an operation was also being prepared to drop ammunition and food to the troops who were on the front line and cut off from their rear because of the sudden thaw. Toward the end of the conversation, Bulganin asked me what I intended to do. I reported that I want to get to the regiments located behind Logistical. I think we should try to get the regiments to the eastern bank of the river, I said. Without shells, it is dangerous to keep them in the same positions. Bulganin approved my decision and asked me to radiate daily about all difficulties. From Bulganin, I went to the front artillery headquarters. The artillery commander, General Pianichkov, was on the left wing of the front. I was met by the Chief of Staff, Major General Vladimir Iosifovich Brezhnev. He too complained about the lack of roads. Who has not been in these swamps? Joked the general. He has not seen grief. The next day, having received food, fuel, saw, rope, jack, crowbar, tractor chains to the wheels, we set off. I was not assigned a staff officer to escort me, as almost all of them were away. Fortunately, the days were sunny. The roads began to dry out somewhere on the high ground, and we were able to cross the places that had not been passable yesterday with relative ease. Only twice during the whole trip we had to use outside help to pull the car out. On the second day, exhausted and dirty, we finally reached the headquarters of Shutov's regiment. In the staff car sat Majors Shutov, Nalbandov and Martinov. They looked gloomy. On the table was a kettle, over which the steam was rising, mugs and a tin can, filled to the top with cigarette butts. I said loudly, "Hello, guardsmen. You don't look so good. Why are you hanging up your noses?" "You can hang up your noses when you haven't eaten anything for 2 days already," said Major Nalbandov. "And who will you be?" "The representative of the commander of the Guards mortar units, Colonel Nestorenko." "This is good. You will know in what conditions we are fighting here. No shells, no food, fuel in the cars is left in a quarter of a tank. We are collecting soaked breadcrumbs and shells from the swamps," said Major Martinov bitterly. "Comrade commanders, these are temporary difficulties. The roads are already drying up, and soon trucks with food and shells will pass by. You'd better report whether your divisions can be removed from firing positions and transferred to the eastern bank of the Lavati. Combat and transport vehicles are on wooden decks, but it is difficult to pull them through these swamps," Nalbandov answered. "And if the fascists go on the offensive?" I asked. "After all, they have better conditions. They use the highway. What will we do then?" "We'll have to pull." "Have you tried laying a plank road to pull the divisions out?" "No." There was no command to retreat. "Let's go to the firing positions. I want to see what conditions the divisions are in. We'll start with the nearest ones." In about 20 minutes, Major Nalbandov and I came to the firing position of the nearest division. The combat rigs were really standing on a pole deck under covers, carefully camouflaged with spruce branches. The transport vehicles were sheltered in the woods and also stood on the decks. The fighters were housed under large trees in huts. Nalbandov explained that since food was poor, the rocket fighters were ordered to conserve their strength. I asked to gather all the fighters near the fighting vehicle, where it was drier. I introduced myself to them, told them that Moscow knew about their plight, that the bad weather had prevented the encirclement and elimination of the Demyansk group of the enemy, so the military equipment must be transported to a safe place on the eastern bank of the Lavati. "There are higher and drier places there," I said. "Food and shells will be easier to deliver there. Our task, no matter how hard it is to lay a log road from the position to the crossing. There's a small spruce forest all around. That's what we need for the planking. I think we can do it all in 2 days. And in 2 or 3 days will come, and the first cars with food." Guardsmen with an upbeat reception of this decision. With the commanders of regiments we visited, and in the rifle units that held the defence in this direction. From conversations with commanders and soldiers of rifle units, found out that the fascists are making vain attempts to expand the corridor in the ring of encirclement. Exerting all their strength, the rocket men built logging roads for 2 days, laid fascine decks through swampy places. The first batteries were brought to the eastern bank of the Lavati River on the second day. And in 2 days all 3 regiments crossed the Lavat and concentrated in drier and safer places. It was easier to deliver food here. It was brought in duffel bags. The most hardy and strong fighters were selected for the food teams. Each delivered 15 to 20 kilograms of food from the nearest rear warehouses. Soon came warm and sunny days, and by the end of April the roads dried up. Convoys moved from the front rear. On April 26th to 27th the regiments received food, fuel, ammunition. But in the same days fascist air raids became more frequent, and the weather was the day, the greater was the danger of attack from the air. Many years have passed since then, and I still see one village, lost in the forests. By fate it was on the road I travelled to the regiments. Its log huts opened their doors hospitably to the weary soldiers. Once I and my driver had to spend the night there. On April 26, 1942, Already returning to the army headquarters, we drove the same way. We saw a sad picture: instead of a village, a huge ashes, and on it half-destroyed stovepipes. Grief-stricken inhabitants wandered among the fires. We stopped near the remains of the house where we had spent the night before. I got out of the car and approached an old man standing alone near a small hill. "Hello, father. What a grief you have." "You see," he replied, "I buried my last grandson. And my wife is almost alive, burnt and lying in the cellar. My daughter-in-law Nastenka and granddaughter Anyutka were burnt. The bombing was at dawn. Children and women were still asleep. And me and the old woman were in the yard. That's why we were saved. Oh, my son, what happened here?" The old man couldn't talk anymore. Tears rolled down his cheeks. How could I comfort this grief-stricken man? How could I help him and other similarly destitute people, not only from this village, but from many thousands of villages and towns? I said quietly, "Be strong, father. We will avenge your grief, your tears for Nastenka and Anyutka, for your grandson." With pain in our hearts, we left the village. Our way lay to the headquarters of the 22nd Regiment, commanded by Colonel Y.A. Koshetkov. This regiment was in the best conditions, and most importantly, it had good communication with the army headquarters, and through it with the headquarters of the group. As soon as the troops began to arrive ammunition and food, the front command began to prepare a private operation for the final encirclement of the Demian grouping of the enemy. During the preparation of the operation, disputes broke out about the method of artillery support for the advancing troops. There were two proposals. Artillerymen insisted on the classical method of artillery preparation with shooting, with the destruction of detected bunkers, dugouts with fire support. Representatives of the Guards mortar units insisted on a sudden fire attack by all artillery means, and mainly by the Guards mortar units. Artillery was proposed to strike at the leading edge with extensive use of direct fire, and the Guards mortar units on the resistance nodes located in the first line of defence. Then it was supposed to transfer the fire in depth, and on the flanks with an immediate attack of infantry. Since the offensive was being prepared from two areas, but in one general direction, the dispute about artillery preparation was resolved arbitrarily. In one area decided to conduct artillery preparation according to the classical scheme, and in the second, the method of a surprise fire attack. On May 3rd, the operation began. As a result, it turned out that where the artillery preparation was carried out according to the classical scheme, our infantry had no success and remained in the same positions. In the area where the sudden fire attack was applied, the advance battalions advanced by 1.5-2 kilometers. But since the attack of our troops on the other section of the attack was smothered, the enemy had the opportunity to transfer reserves to the place where the success of our troops. As a result, the enemy was able to suspend the offensive in this direction. It became obvious that in the conditions of wooded and swampy terrain with limited visibility and completely unseen depth of the enemy's defence, the best method of artillery support, a sudden fire attack on a narrow front of the breakthrough with a high density of fire, the reliable support of the flanks of the fire of artillery and Guards mortar units, as well as a rapid attack of infantry immediately after the fire raid. The advantage of such artillery support for the breakthrough of enemy defences was repeatedly confirmed on other fronts. From Moscow, I received an order to go to the left wing of the front, where there were other Guards mortar units. The roads had already dried up enough, and in 2 days I arrived at the regiment commanded by the hero of the Soviet Union, Guards Major Kazbek Drisovich Karsanov. He was a tall, statuesque man with a beautiful black beard. Strong-willed face, calm, confident movements, judiciousness inspired respect and sympathy to this man. Looking ahead, I will say that Kazbek Drisovich finished the war with the rank of Major General, commanding the 7th Guards Mortar Division. After a cursory familiarization with the division, which was located not far from the headquarters of the unit, it became clear to me that the regiment was combat-ready. Together with Karsanov, we outlined a plan to check the divisions and the rear of the regiment. But I did not have to carry out this inspection, as I soon received an order to leave for Moscow. Before returning to the capital, I stopped by the front headquarters to see General Y.P. Bazanov, whom I had not yet been able to meet, and a member of the military council of the operational group of the Guards mortar units of the front, Colonel G.S. Dolzhikov. I reported to them on the results of the inspection, conveyed my impression of the regiments and the group as a whole. It was good. Despite everything, the regiments remained combat-ready, their morale high. Yuri Pavlovich explained the temporary difficulties in providing the units with food and ammunition by the fact that they did not expect such a sudden and early onset of spring thaw, so they did not have time to bring everything they needed for the period of roadlessness. We parted as friends. In the fall of 1943 and in 1944 Yuri Pavlovich and I were on neighbouring fronts, he on the 1st and I on the 2nd Baltic. Both commanded Guards mortar units. When the situation allowed, we visited each other, exchanged combat experience. Yuri Pavlovich was a wonderful comrade, demanding and caring military commander. Our friendship remained even after the war. The last time we saw Marshal of Artillery Yuri P. Bozhanov was on August 8, 1974, in Dikhanka, during the meeting of veterans of the 4th Guards Mortar Regiment. As soon as I entered General Laborenkov's office and reported on my return, he summoned members of the Military Council, P.A., Dejtyarov and L.M.N. Dejikov. I reported to them the results of the inspection. Yes, at Bozhanov all comes to normal, concluded Laborenkov. But on the southern front all is not well. You'll have to go there. You will go to the task force, where the head of the hero of the Soviet Union, Colonel L.M. Vovodin. He is a brave officer, has combat experience, but he must help. The task force consists of 3 regiments and 2 separate divisions. It is possible that you will have to take command of the group, so carefully study the situation, the state of the units. Inform me about the progress of the inspection. When you arrive in Starobelsk at the front headquarters, immediately report to the front commander. A day later I was in Starobelsk at the front commander, General R.Y. Malinovsky. He kindly received me, asked about my combat experience. After a short conversation he said, "Get to work. If serious shortcomings are found, report immediately, and a detailed report will be made after the end of the inspection." In the fall of 1941, after a heavy withdrawal from Kharkov, Starobelsk seemed to me a grey and boring little town. Now, in the midst of spring, it looked almost festive. Already familiar streets, I went to the headquarters of the task force. Voivodin himself was not in Starobelsk. He was in the army, but no one in the headquarters knew exactly where he was. I presented my prescription to the Chief of Staff, Lieutenant Colonel G.V. Osmolovsky, who gave the impression of an energetic and strong-willed commander. He called a member of the military council of the group, Colonel Pa Lapayev, and reported that the inspector arrived. Some time later came Lapayev. "When will Voivodin arrive?" I asked him. He didn't know exactly. "In that case, let's lose no time," I said. "Before his return, you familiarize me with the affairs at the front. Tell me where the regiments are and what condition they are in. After that, we'll make a plan for inspecting the units. I ask you to provide me with an officer, a car and, of course, a good driver." The members of the military council of this group were Colonel P. A. Lapiev, Regimental Commissar M.I. Drozhozhagin and Regimental Commissar I. N. Lukovsky. By the time of my arrival, Drozhozhagin and Lemakovsky were also in the troops. According to the plan of checking the units, I was to start from the artillery warehouse located on the outskirts of Starobelsk, and then go to the 2nd Regiment and 48th Division, which were on the right wing of the front, on the section of the 9th Army, not far from Isium. However, things at the front turned out so that I had to leave urgently to the 2nd Regiment. On May 18th, 1942, about 12 o'clock in the afternoon, we arrived at the 2nd Guards Mortar Regiment. Its commander, Colonel I.S. Schenker, reported that the enemy had broken through the front and our troops were retreating. There is no communication with the army headquarters. "Where are your divisions?" I asked. "Divisions on this bank, on waiting positions in the woods," said the colonel. "It is impossible to transfer them to the western bank of the Donets floods. There is a small ferry, but it is very slow. The Seversky Donets overflowed widely. The water flooded many trees and bushes. Their tops protruded above the silver surface as green islands. Artillery cannonade was heard in the distance. Enemy airplanes were continuously circling in the air. The horizon was covered with smoke. It was clear that the main battle would break out for the crossing of the Donets. Therefore, I ordered Colonel Schenker 1 Division to deploy to cover the crossing and 2 to send to Isium. After a while, Schenker reported that the 2 divisions were sent to Isium and on the left, 5 kilometers away, deployed the 2nd Division of Capt. D. Dorokov and 48th Separate Division of Senior Lieutenant P. V. Loginov. There is also the commander of the task force. Colonel Voyevodin I found at the observation post of the commander of the 48th Division. At this time, the advanced German units were already somewhere approaching the Seversky Donets. There was little artillery here, and the salvos of the Guards divisions, led by Voyevodin, played a decisive role. Advance of Hitlerites was suspended. Voyevodin clearly and confidently controlled the fire. Under artillery fire and during the air raid he behaved courageously. It was obvious that this man had great willpower. Heated by the battle, Voyevodin said, "Great we gave the Croats a light. They will not be able to ford Donets now. Serious danger is now hanging over our units in the area of Isium. I emphasize the fascists will seek to seize the bridge. I consider it advisable to go to Isium to establish communication with the headquarters of the 9th Army." "That's right," agreed Voyevodin. "Go there and help Schenker. Yes, keep in mind that tomorrow morning the 43rd Guards Mortar Regiment should arrive in Isium. It left Voroshilovgrad today. Try to meet it." "I will." Having said goodbye to Voyevodin, I rushed to Isium. The day was coming to an end. Dusk was falling. With Captain Smirnov in the pitch darkness, we made our way through the forest to Isium, for a long time winding along unfamiliar forest roads. At the roadside, under the trees, we saw dark silhouettes of combat vehicles. It was a division of the 2nd Regiment. Having found the commander, I asked why they had stopped in the forest and not gone to Isium. "Comrade Colonel," replied the commander of the division, "intelligence reported that from Isium moving trucks and wagons." I burst out. "Do you know your task? After all, you were ordered to concentrate in the forest 5 kilometers south of Isium, to contact the units defending the city, to help them by fire. I warn you, I'll be there at dawn, where your division should be ready to fight by that time." Not reaching Isium about 10 kilometers, we met a stream of cars and submarines. Some rear units and population were leaving the town. North of Isium in the woods, we came across the artillery warehouse of the operational group of the Guards mortar units of the Southwestern Front, Colonel Zubanov. The head of the warehouse reported that in the forest stored shells in stacks. To take them out with nothing to do, there is no transportation, and there is no communication with the headquarters of the group. He, almost with tears in his eyes, begged for help. "Let your shells go to the 2nd and 43rd Regiments of the Southern Front," I said. "How can you let another front without the permission of the command?" begged the chief of the warehouse. "I take all responsibility for the consumption of shells. I left a written order to the chief of the artillery warehouse to release shells to the 2nd and 43rd Regiments at their request, and I wrote a note to Zubanov explaining my decision. Soon in the same forest we found the headquarters of the 9th Army, or rather, until the place where it was concentrated. Under the overhanging birch tree directly on the ground sat extremely tired Army Commander Major General F. M. Karatonov. Together with 2 officers, he was leaning over a map unfolded on the ground. I introduced myself to the general, showed my documents, said that I knew the difficult situation in the army area, and nevertheless I asked for help to remove the shells. The commander, having listened to me, sighed and said reproachfully, "Colonel, we have nothing to carry the guns." But after thinking about it, he said, "Indeed, what to do? We cannot leave the enemy a secret weapon." The commander called the chief of the rear and ordered him to urgently send all the vehicles of the rear and headquarters to transport the shells. "Thank you for your help, Comrade General." I rejoiced. "I am glad to inform you that 2 divisions of the 2nd Regiment arrived in the area of Isium, and the 43rd Guards Mortar Regiment M13 is approaching." What a thing! We need your help badly now. Our units are barely holding back the enemy. He's rushing to the bridge. Any minute now we are waiting for his new offensive. The task is clear to me, I answered. Permission to act. I'll send a liaison officer to your headquarters. Now I'm going to meet the 43rd Regiment. It's on its way to Isium. Well, thank you again for the good news. We can't get in touch with the front headquarters. The bombing has damaged our radio stations. I ask you to assign your divisions a task as soon as possible and have them contact the front battalions themselves. We, unfortunately, do not know exactly where the command posts of the divisions and their headquarters are now. Both divisions of the 2nd Regiment arrived at the indicated place and took up battle order. Officers were sent forward to maintain communication with the forward rifle units occupying the defences along the west bank of the Seversky Donets. Each division allocated 10 vehicles for the transfer of shells. About 15 kilometres southeast of Isium, Captain Smirnov and I met a column of the 43rd Guards Mortar Regiment, led by its commander, Lieutenant Colonel MP Gorokov. He was tasked to accelerate the advance of the regiment and be ready for combat operations. On the map I indicated to Gorokov the areas of firing positions and observation points, as well as the location of the 9th Army headquarters, where we should send a liaison officer, showed the position of our defending units, areas that may have to fire, warned that the freed cars from under the shells should be immediately sent to the art warehouse of Zubanov's group, and in the future to receive shells from this warehouse. While we were meeting the 43rd Regiment, on the western bank of the river the battle began. The enemy was tearing towards the crossings. Over the bridge and our forward positions continuously circled Junkers. Nazi chains were moving to the bridge. Divisions of the 2nd Regiment fired 2 volleys each, but from their observation points the terrain on the opposite bank was poorly viewed, and they could not see that the main danger loomed over the right flank, on the western outskirts of Isium. From the height, which was 3 kilometres southeast of the city, not only the western bank, but also the distant approaches to it were clearly visible. So Smirnov and I drove out to the height. From the crest of the height in binoculars we could see the attacking chains of Hitlerites, reserves in company columns, moving tanks and cars. The enemy was pushing our units. At the bridge the advanced enemy chains seized the right bank heights and descended to the river. There was a threat of capturing the crossing. It was impossible to fire on the attacking Hitlerites from closed positions at this range, as the enemy was cutting into our defence in the direction of the bridge with a narrow wedge. The ellipse of dispersion of shells would be stretched along the front. To open fire meant to inflict a defeat on our own units as well. Unfortunately, our artillery on this section of the front was very little. It could not hold back the onslaught of the enemy with its sparse fire. What to do? How to help our units? Comrade Colonel, look, shouted Captain Smirnov. Gorokov's column appeared. It's true. Behind us, about 2 kilometres behind, was a division of the 43rd Regiment. The decision matured instantly to take the division to the heights and give a direct volley through Isium. The distance to the enemy was 3 or 4 kilometres. His advanced chains, tanks, individual vehicles descend down the gentle slope to the bridge. The conditions for direct fire are ideal. We rushed towards ours. In front we saw Gorokov and the division commander. Comrade Lieutenant Colonel. I addressed Gorokov. Load the fighting vehicles and take them to that height over there. The enemy is attacking, give him a volley of direct fire. Gorokov looked at me with surprise. Comrade Colonel, we will be immediately covered with artillery fire and bombed from above. Look what's going on around you. I repeated the order in a tone that allowed no objection. Bring 1 division to the heights immediately. Deploy the rest as you were instructed before. I understood the state of mind of the regimental commander. No sooner had we arrived at the front than straight from the march into battle, and even fire from an open position. But there was no other way out. It was necessary to stop the enemy in front of the bridge by all means. Loaded vehicles in a deployed formation went to the crest of the height. We showed the battery commanders the general aiming point on the terrain, accurately determined on the map the position of the target, firing position, as well as the range of fire. In order not to make a mistake, and not to hit our troops, we made 4 firing shots. The shells lay well, and here comes the command. On the enemies of our homeland, fire. In a few seconds, the slopes of the heights on the other bank were shrouded in grey smoke, and the combat vehicles one after another went into the forest. The division was ordered to load the guns again and be ready for another salvo. The result was gratifying. The slopes of the heights facing in our direction helped to reduce the dispersion of shells. The slope greatly increased the density of fire. In the area of impact, burned tanks, lying corpses of fascists. The survived Hitlerites in panic ran back. The German offensive was suspended. The enemy columns approaching from the depth began to dismember and hide in the ravines. Fire, apparently, was unexpected, and for our troops. Not having an order, they did not go on the offensive, as it usually happened after successful volleys of our Katyushas. Meanwhile, enemy planes did not appear above us, and the artillery did not hit at altitude. It was impossible to miss an opportunity. We repeated the volley, but put it further, in depth, on the second echelons of the enemy. Only we had time to take the fighting vehicles to the forest, as shells began to burst at the height, and in a few minutes dive bombers appeared above it. But the height was already deserted. Division 43rd Regiment, which provided great assistance to the defending troops of the 9th Army, had already managed to withdraw several kilometers deep into the forest. The rest of the divisions occupied the fighting order and established communication with the general army and artillery chiefs of this direction. So, 5 Katyusha divisions were concentrated on the 9th Army site near Isium. 2 more divisions were operating to the south, where Voivodin was located. For May 19th and 20, the front stabilized. All the shells of the artillery warehouse group Zubanov were moved 30 to 40 kilometers to the rear of the southwestern front. On May 22nd, being at the commander of the 9th Army, I thanked him for his help in evacuating the shells, and he in turn thanked the Guards for fire support. On my way back, I visited the 2nd and 43rd Regiments and the 48th Independent Division. My acquaintance with the divisions was brief. The test of their combat effectiveness took place in battle. I was forced to leave for the front headquarters without seeing Voivodin. He was in the units, although I was very eager to share my assessments and conclusions with him. At the front headquarters, in the presence of a member of the Military Council, Divisional Commissar I, Larin and Chief of Staff General A. Antonov, I reported to the front commander, General R. Malinovsky, about the events that occurred in the area of Isium, about the actions of the Guards' mortar units, about the disposition of the commander of the 9th Army, who helped to evacuate the artillery depot, about the bravery of Colonel Voivodin. At the end of our conversation, General Malinovsky said, addressing me, "You are now well enough familiarized with the state of the parts of the task force of our front. I suggest that you take command of the group. About this I have already talked to General Laborenkov. There are no words. Voivodin is a brave officer and a competent artilleryman. But that's not all." I thanked the front commander for his trust and accepted his offer. "Well and good," concluded Malinovsky. "From tomorrow you will take command of the Guards' mortar units of the front. I will inform Voivodin about this decision. I ask you to introduce yourself to the members of the Military Council of the front, Comrades Korniets, Saramolotny, the artillery commander, General Zhuk, and the chief of the rear, General Shibunin." Thus ended my short inspection service. At the end of May 1942, the headquarters of the Southern Front, and together with it the headquarters of the operational group of Guards mortar units, moved from Starobelsk to Voroshilovgrad. The headquarters of the group was staffed with capable and competent officers, especially distinguished by clarity in the work of the Assistant Chief of Staff Major V. Rusanov and the head of the operational department Captain Mayakushev. Lieutenant P. V. Shaimov had an amazing memory. He remembered the numbers of orders and directives, numbers of files in which they are filed, knew the number of personnel of regiments, the presence of combat vehicles and shells. I often took him with me to the troops and was sure that he would memorize all the necessary information and accurately put the situation on the map. The other officers of the staff also made a pleasant impression. Captain N. A. Smirnov, Senior Lieutenant I. S. Shishochka, Senior Lieutenant M.G. Paramonov, and others. Soon a member of the military council of the group, P.A. A. Lapayev, was recalled to Moscow. With M.I. Drozhine and I, in Nolukovsky, I established the kindest business relations. In May, a mobile repair workshop headed by an experienced repairer and a good organizer military engineer of the 3rd rank A. AFAF, Alfarov, and Commissar Captain F. Novosad arrived from Moscow. PRM-6 was perfectly equipped with machine tools, power units, and spare parts. Then, during the heavy defensive fighting and withdrawal of the Southern Front troops, it played a very big role in the repair and restoration of the pounded combat and transport vehicles. The rear of our group consisted of an artillery depot, which was relocated to Belaya Kalitva, with a large stock of shells, a fuel and lubricants department, a PRM, and a sanitary service. These rear units were headed by Major I. A. Evzyukov, head of the artillery and technical supply department, a strong-willed and enterprising officer. In heavy defensive battles he provided the units with ammunition, fuel, and timely organized the evacuation of the artillery storage and repair facilities together with the hit and defective vehicles. After moving to Voroshilovgrad, I began my acquaintance with the units of the group with the 8th Guards Mortar Regiment, which was located near Dzerzhinsk. At that time it was commanded by Lieutenant Colonel A. M. Lobanov. A knowledgeable artilleryman, judicious and demanding commander, he was highly respected by all the personnel. The commissar of the regiment was the battalion commissar B.S. Koklov, who graduated from the school. S. Koklov, who before the war graduated from the Lenin Military and Political Academy. He was an exceptionally attentive, tactful man. A good impression made, and the chief of staff of the regiment, Major X. A. Makarian. I was pleasantly surprised to meet in this regiment Captain Nevada Skurda, one of the artillerymen whom I selected at Yelnya to staff the 1st Regiments of Reactive Artillery. In the 8th Guards Mortar Regiment, he commanded the 1st Division. Of course, I began my acquaintance with the regiment with this division. We arrived there together with Lieutenant Colonel Lobanov. In the course of acquaintance, it became clear that Skurda demanded from all personnel excellent command of not only equipment, but also hand-to-hand combat techniques. Each soldier and commander had to be able to shoot a rifle, throw grenades, overcome various kinds of obstacles, make quick runs, crawl in a crawl. Around the positions were dug slits and deep cells for single fighters. Well, it is good that you are teaching the guards everything that is necessary in battle, I said to Skurd, but it is necessary to check how you have taught them the main thing. We raised the division on alarm, took it to the field and deployed in combat order. We carefully checked the initial data for firing at specified targets. The personnel of the division showed good coherence and training. Captain Skurda, I said to my old comrade, I like your method. You teach exactly what is needed in war. But tell me, is the division trained in direct fire? No. Why? Because our installations don't allow firing closer than 2 kilometers. So what's direct fire? Direct fire for anti-tank artillery is one thing, but for our systems it's quite another. It's a powerful barrage of fire at the minimum allowable range. Hearing this, Skurda waved his hands. Comrade Colonel, we didn't think of that. Well, let's think together. Today we will conduct a demonstration firing by 1 battery. In the conditions of our front, we must be ready for direct fire. In the afternoon, on specially selected terrain in the presence of the regiment's battery and division commanders, we conducted a direct fire drill. Because of the large dispersion in range, the firing of single shells did not make a strong impression, especially on those who had seen the direct fire of barrel artillery. But the salvo of the launcher was impressive. 16 shells fired in 6 to 8 seconds began to burst almost simultaneously in a narrow strip of the firing sector. The first bursts were 400 meters from the firing position. To reduce the range of fire, the installation was placed on a slope. There were no direct hits on the shield targets, but almost all of them were hit by shrapnel. Everyone realized that this way of shooting should be learned. A few days later, I got acquainted with the 14th Separate Guards Mortar Division of Sailors. With the staff officers Captain Smirnov and Senior Lieutenant Shuchka, we arrived in the village of Postal Yar, where this division was located. At the headquarters, we were met by two naval officers. One of them was Lieutenant Commander Moskvin, the commander, and the other was Battalion Commissar Yurovsky, the commissar of the division. Moskvin reported to me on the state of the division, characterized the command staff. The division was staffed by sailors of the Red Banner Baltic Fleet. They were courageous people, tested in battle. The division sacredly preserved naval traditions. For example, every half an hour the duty officer on duty beat off the vials in the same way as it was done on warships. When I asked Moskvin whether the bell strikes did not interfere with the sailors' rest, he looked at me in surprise. "What do you mean, Comrade Colonel? When sailors hear the bells, they sleep more peacefully." The traditional naval terminology also attracted attention. Galley, Kok, report, vials. The commander of the division, Arseny Petrovich Moskvin, graduated from the Sevastopol Coastal Defense School in 1937. He was sent to the Red Banner Baltic Fleet on the destroyer Nivny. He commanded BS-2, was XO, participated in battles with the White Finns, then served in the Navy Personnel Department. As soon as the Great Patriotic War began, Moskvin filed a report on secondment to the active fleet. He was refused. But during the heavy fighting near Vyazma, he was appointed commander of a battery, which was part of the artillery group of the Navy. His battery was then armed with the most modern guns of large caliber, capable of inflicting great damage to the enemy. When our units were surrounded near Vyazma, the guns had to be blown up. Under Moskvin's command, the sailors made their way to their own. Battalion Commissar Evgeny Yakovlevich Yurovsky, in the first days of the Great Patriotic War, was the commissar of a battery near Rozhev. After leaving the encirclement, he, like Moskvin, was assigned to the 14th Separate Guards Mortar Division of Sailors. In the same division came battery commanders graduates of the Sevastopol Coastal Defense School, Lieutenants N.M. Pavliuk and D.N. Beryashvili. Moskvin and Yurovsky were lucky to lead the combat team of sailors on land. After getting acquainted with the command staff of the division, we went to lunch in the officers' dining room, which was arranged in the courtyard of the headquarters under a canopy. Sailors called it wardroom. On calm days, the officers of the division dined in the wardroom all together. Needless to say, it brought them even closer together. During lunch, I asked Moskvin whether the division had been trained in direct fire from open positions. It turned out that the sailors had heard about it for the first time. I ordered a demonstration of direct fire. To reduce the range of fire under the front wheels of combat vehicles, dug grooves so that the minimum angle of elevation was about 5 to 10 degrees. Battery commanders were warned that at 0 angle of elevation on level terrain, the shells lay not far from the fighting vehicles. This could lead to their defeat. In this case, there was no danger. There was a hollow in front of the firing position, and the targets were placed behind it, on a slope. One gun was successful. There was a direct hit on a tank. The other targets were hit by large fragments. In the last days of July and early August, in the battles near Rostov and in the Salish steppes, the 14th Division widely used this method of firing. On the southern front, from May 20th to July 15th, 1942, there was a lull. However, operational reports of the General Staff, agent data and data of aviation and army intelligence indicated that this was the calm before the storm. Hitler's command, seeking to seize the strategic initiative, decided to concentrate large forces in the south of the country, to seize the Caucasus with its oil, to reach the Volga, to seize Stalingrad. By July 5th, at the cost of heavy losses, the enemy managed to overcome the Soviet defences at the junction of the Bryansk and Southwestern fronts and reach the Don. Fierce battles were fought in the Voronezh area. On July 17th, the 6th, and then the 4th Tank Armies of Hitlerites were turned to the southeast and began to develop an attack along the right bank of the Don on Kantimirova and Milarovo, trying to encircle and destroy the Soviet units on the right bank. The front troops had to urgently create a deeply echeloned defence. Not only troops, but also local population were involved in the construction of defensive structures. They created anti-tank ditches, hollows, pillboxes and bunkers. Our units were engaged in combat training, accumulated ammunition, fuel and food. Additional staffing of men and military equipment was carried out. The command warned us that Hitlerites against our front have numerical superiority in tanks, motorized troops and aviation. In these days, the length of the Southern Front was about 300 kilometers. There were 5 armies in its composition. One Guards mortar units had only 4 regiments, 8th, 43rd, 49th, and 67th, and 2 separate divisions, 101st and 14th. The 2nd Regiment and the 48th Division were transferred to the Southwestern Front. Instead of them, the 67th Regiment arrived from Moscow. By the decision of the Front Command, the Guards mortar units were advanced to the most important directions. On the right flank of the 37th Army, 43rd and 49th Regiments, in the centre, west of Dzerzhinsk, 8th. On the section of the 56th Army, there were 2 separate divisions. The 67th Guards Mortar Regiment was in reserve. Taking into account the conditions of the stepped terrain and the superiority of the enemy in tanks and motorized troops, we prepared our units for maneuver battles. In preparing batteries and divisions, much attention was paid to training in direct fire. The group headquarters developed a temporary instruction for such firing. A well-prepared and trained direct fire battery needed 3 to 5 minutes to move out of cover, fire a salvo, and withdraw to cover. In such a short time, neither artillery nor enemy aviation had time to cover it with fire. Extremely great work was carried out in the units to select and equip reserve firing positions and observation posts in the bands of action of the supported armies, on reconnaissance and reconnaissance of roads, accumulation of ammunition. July 15th, 1942 began the offensive of the Nazi troops in the south of our country. Having overcome the resistance of the Southwestern Front units, the 4th Tank and 6th Armies of Hitlerites were approaching Milerovo. There was a threat to the left flank and rear of the Southern Front. At the same time, the 1st Tank Army of the enemy went on the offensive on the right wing of the Southern Front. The Hitlerites struck the main blow on the section Isium, Lysychansk, at the junction of the Southern and Southwestern Fronts. With powerful air support of the 1st and 4th Tank Armies of the enemy broke through the front and rushed to Stalingrad and the Caucasus. The most difficult battles on the right wing of the Southern Front had to be fought by the 37th Army. Tank and mechanized columns of the enemy forced the Seversky Donets in several places. Right flank divisions and headquarters of the 37th Army had to withdraw. During the withdrawal, the communication between the Army headquarters and the front headquarters was broken. The front commander, General Malinovsky, ordered me to leave urgently to the 37th Army to search for the headquarters, to clarify the position of the army, and to check how the 43rd and 49th Guards mortar regiments, which were in its operational subordination, were being used. On July 16, 1942, Captain Smirnov and I crossed the Seversky Donets on an all-terrain vehicle on a temporary bridge. Not far from the crossing, at the edge of the forest, we met a division of the 43rd Guards Mortar Regiment. The commander of the division reported that the army units, including our regiments, were withdrawing. We drove on. In one of the villages located in the valley of a small river, we were approached by the chief of reconnaissance of the division of the 43rd Regiment. He excitedly reported that from the northeast were coming Nazi tanks and motorized convoy, the distance to them 6-8 kilometers. On our right there was a hill. We decided to go there. I ordered the chief of intelligence to follow towards the division and urgently bring it to a firing position, on the western outskirts of the village, stretching from there a telephone link to us to the height. Comrade Colonel, the chief of intelligence turned to me. Allow me to pull the connection directly from you to the area of the firing position. I have communicators in the car with me, and they have a spool of wires and telephone sets. Great, it will speed things up, I replied. No sooner had the communicators laid a line than the combat vehicles took up a firing position. During this time, Smirnov on the map prepared the initial data for firing. As soon as the phones were connected, we transmitted this data to the firing position. After the control shots fired a salvo. The shells rumbled to our left, and in a few seconds the enemy tanks and motorized convoy were covered with a continuous shroud of smoke. At this range of firing, the ellipse of shell dispersion was approaching a circle, so all the enemy's tanks which were marching in a deployed front, and a considerable part of the motorized column were covered by the salvo. When the smoke cleared, we saw that the surviving tanks and vehicles, having changed direction, were quickly moving away to the northeast. After the salvo, we were sought out by an officer from the 37th Army headquarters. He pointed out to us his location. Arriving at the Army headquarters, I reported to the Army commander, Major General P.M. Kozlov, and the artillery commander, Major General M.I. Nedlin that I had arrived from the front commander and reported about the salvo. "We heard your volley." "It was unexpected for us," Kozlov said worriedly. I explained the reasons. Kozlov and Nedlin asked me to convey thanks to the division commander and all the guards. Soon a telephone line was laid from the Katyusha division to the Army headquarters. General Nedlin took energetic measures to establish communication with the artillery units that were to withdraw to this line. By radio, I was able to contact the headquarters of the 43rd and 49th Regiments, their commanders MP, Gorokov and I. Sukushin reported that they were supporting the divisions that were fighting rearguard. Having received information from General Kozlov about the position of the army and the next lines of withdrawal, late in the evening Smirnov and I left for Voroshilovgrad. On the night of July 16, 1942, the Military Council approved the plan of withdrawal of the troops, developed by the front headquarters in pursuance of the Stavka Directive. On July 16, the troops of the Southern Front began the withdrawal to Novocherkassk, Rostov. On the basis of the same plan, the headquarters of our task force developed a plan to ensure combat operations of the Guards mortar units of the front in the defensive battles. The main attention was paid to the maintenance of stable communication with the units. In the plan, a special place was occupied by the issues of ammunition and fuel supply. The most difficult task was the timely evacuation of the ammunition accumulated in the units, as well as the ammunition available at the group's artillery depot near Belaya Kalitva. By the beginning of the evacuation, there were 7,320 M8 shells and 11,450 M13 shells in the depot. It was out of the question to quickly transport such a large number of shells over a long distance using the depot's vehicles. It was impossible to count on the help of the front and the army. The only possible way to evacuate the ammunition was their successive transfer from frontier to frontier to frontier for 50 to 60 kilometers by transport of the artillery depot and units. In addition, it was necessary to ensure the evacuation of the mobile repair shop with defective combat and transport vehicles. Knowing the direction of withdrawal of the army, we accordingly outlined the boundaries of the successive transfer of shells, fuel and repair facilities. At the same time, we also worked out alternatives in case of changes in the situation. There were outlined and assembly points in the deep rear in case of loss of communication and separation of units during the withdrawal. These alternate options were very useful to us later. They helped to find many lagging, lost units and individual vehicles. And, of course, an invaluable service to the Guards mortar units was rendered by a single identifying sign V, which was established by my order as soon as I took command of the task force. All our units, regiments and individual divisions were provided with radios and had direct communication with the group headquarters, which was always located at the front headquarters or at its temporary field control. In addition, mutual information between units and transmission of orders through liaison officers was established. This allowed timely orientation of the commanders of units, where and when they can get ammunition and fuel, where to send defective combat and transport vehicles, as well as correctly and timely determine the direction and boundaries of the transfer of ammunition from the artillery depot. On the right wing of the Southern Front, where the 37th Army fought, on July 19th, the planned withdrawal of troops was disrupted. In some areas there were large gaps between the retreating units and formations. The control of troops and their interaction was disturbed. I was concerned about the large number of rockets accumulated at the artillery depot and decided to go to Belaya Kalitva. It turned out that on the initiative of the Commissar of the Art Depot G.S. Kozlov, a determined and energetic man, most of the shells were loaded onto barges towed by a steamer and sent down the Seversky Donets to Rostov. The rest of the shells remained on the eastern bank of the Donets for the time being. At that time, the enemy's advanced tank groups and mechanized units had already reached Belaya Kalitva from the east, threatening the artillery depot. The shells could be saved only by transferring them to the western bank of the river by the railroad bridge and further towards the cities of Shakhty and Novocherkassk. But in Belaya Kalitva, there were neither cars nor steam locomotives. Then we decided to transport the shells over the railroad bridge by motor transport. In order not to break the springs when moving on the sleepers, the cars were not loaded. A strict schedule of movement was established. Fast loading and unloading of vehicles was organized. The railroad bridge was repeatedly subjected to brutal bombing. Fortunately, there was not a single direct hit. During the night, all the shells were transported to the western bank of the Seversky Donets, and then they were delivered in batches first to the town of Shakhty, and then to Maly Mishkin, west of Novocherkassk. This urgent evacuation demanded from the drivers and workers of the art depot full dedication. Captain A.P., Konarov, Senior Lieutenants I, Vasin and M.L. Maltsev showed initiative and resourcefulness. Having made sure that the shells were transported to the western shore, I left for Lykaya Station. It was necessary to find the 8th Regiment and find out about the fate of the 67th Regiment, with which communication was interrupted. Not far from Lykaya, on a field road, I met the ubiquitous Major I. A. Ivyakov, who in fact performed the duties of deputy chief of the group on the rear. From him I learned that he had already been to Lykoi, and by means of the 8th Regiment transferred shells from there to Maly Mishkin, some of them transferred to the Division of Sailors. Ivyakov also reported that the 8th Regiment was transferred to Novocherkassk by order of the front headquarters, and there was no communication with the 67th Regiment. The day was unusually hot. The sun was shining brightly. The road was flanked by fields of ripening bread. In the farms were green gardens. And suddenly everything changed at once. The enemy dive bombers raided the station Lykaya. Railway trains and station buildings caught fire. Black smoke clouds rose up, covering the sun. In the distance we heard the rumble of artillery firing and bursting shells. We, without stopping, moved toward the Lihoi station. Soon we met several vehicles of the 43rd GMP. The officer leading the column reported that their regiment was concentrating in the village of Grashovka. I decided to go there together with them, and to search for the 67th Regiment I sent Petty Officer S. N. Boltsev to everywhere. N. Boltsev on an all-terrain vehicle. On the outskirts of the village of Grashovka, near the precipitous bank of the Kondryokya River, we found the 43rd Regiment. The commander of the regiment, Lieutenant Colonel M.P. Gorokov, and the commander of the Heavy Artillery Regiment, Lieutenant Colonel A.I. Ratov, decided to deploy their units here to cover the withdrawal of army troops. What is known about the enemy? What our rifle units are defending this line? I asked. There are no infantry units here. According to the commander's decision, the troops of the 37th Army should withdraw to the Kondryokya River, reported Ratov. We met Ratov for the first time. He made an impression of a calm, intelligent man, an experienced artilleryman. So, June 20th, 1942, on the outskirts of the city of Shakhty, near the village of Grashovka, occupied the defence of the Heavy Artillery Regiment of 152mm guns, led by Lieutenant Colonel Ratov, and 43rd Guards Mortar Regiment of Lieutenant Colonel Gorokov. Using the right of the commander of the GMCH front, I ordered Ratov part of his guns to put on direct fire. Terrain conditions allowed to do this. The 43rd Regiment was ordered to prepare fires on areas of possible enemy concentration and on the crossings on the Kondryokya River. 2 hours later, the 152mm guns were placed in ramps on direct fire. The 43rd Regiment took the main firing positions. The division commanders were preparing initial data for firing on the designated areas. About 3 o'clock in the afternoon in Grashovka, in cars with accompanying officers, arrived Commander of the 37th Army, General P. M. Kozlov, and Commander of the Artillery of the Army, General M.L.M.I. Niederdin. The 37th Army during these 5 days of heavy fighting and took the first powerful blow of the enemy, when Generals P. M. Kozlov and M.I. Nedlin learned that the defence was organised here by 2 artillery regiments, They immediately decided to strengthen it with retreating infantry units and anti-tank artillery. I was asked to lead the defense of this area until the approach of infantry. On the terrain, Kozlov showed us the area where it was supposed to organize an observation post of the army. Reconnaissance of the 43rd Regiment soon reported that from the right flank in our direction are moving enemy tanks. I ordered Gorokov to send a division of Katyushas to the right flank and I followed it. On the march, the division was attacked by dive bombers. The batteries quickly dispersed. In order not to be late in opening fire on the tanks, and to prevent them from forcing the Kundryokya River, on the orders of the battery commanders, the combat vehicles at long intervals, one after the other went to the hill and fired at direct fire. After the salvo, the units went into the ravine, reloaded and fired again. The advance of enemy tanks was stopped. Despite the raids of bombers, the guardsmen acted selflessly. The division suffered relatively small losses. 5 men were wounded, 3 fighting vehicles and 1 cargo vehicle were damaged. After a while, another group of German tanks went on the attack in the direction of Grushovka. They were hit by 152mm guns. Firing direct fire, they hit 3 tanks, the rest withdrew and hid in a ravine. But on the right flank again appeared fascist tanks. They were met by volleys of Katyusha and fire of guns of Ratov's Volk. At the same time, artillerymen had to fight off dive bombers. Anti-aircraft batteries hit one enemy plane. With a long tail of black smoke, rapidly descending, he disappeared over the horizon. As if in response to this, 8 Junkers, one after another, began to dive on the anti-aircraft battery of Ratov's regiment. It was a brutal duel. The anti-aircraft gunners were firing despite the bombs bursting on the positions. Not a single calculation did not go into hiding. Here's one gun out of action. Second. The third. The surviving gun kept firing. Nazi tanks again went on the attack, but this attempt of the enemy to force the river Kundryokya failed. Having lost a few more vehicles, the Nazis withdrew. Our infantry and anti-tank artillery never appeared on this line. Meanwhile, intelligence reported that the enemy tank groups were bypassing our flanks. It was necessary to withdraw the regiments to the next line. Night came. We began to withdraw to the city of Shakti. From the flanks, our withdrawal was covered by successive volleys of separate installations. Night volleys of Katyusha delayed the advance of enemy tanks. The threat of encirclement was eliminated. The tractors of Ratov's artillery regiment towed the 43rd Regiment's destroyed installations. That night, intelligence reported that there was no enemy in the city of Shakti, and the headquarters of the 37th Army temporarily located in the village of Kadamovskoye, 5 kilometers southeast of the city. We decided to withdraw the regiments to the vicinity of the village of Markin and to the southern outskirts of the city of Shakti. I arrived at the army headquarters about 2 o'clock in the morning. General Kozlov informed me that the army units failed to withdraw to the Kundryokya River line in time. The enemy tanks were ahead of us, and he decided to take the defense on the northern outskirts of Shakti, Kerch, the mouth of the Kundryokya River. "We are taking all measures to stop the enemy at this line," said Kozlov. "I ask you to report about it to the front commander." On a semi-truck of the 43rd Regiment, with the driver Grigoreyev and a lieutenant of the same regiment, I went to the front headquarters, which according to the plan of withdrawal at this time should have been in Bolshoi Mishkin, 5 kilometers west of Novocherkassk. Not far from the front headquarters were the headquarters of our PRM task force and part of the artillery depot. July 21st, early in the morning, I reported to the front commander, Gen. IAER Malinovsky, about the state of affairs in the 37th Army section, about the condition of the Guards' mortar units, as well as the fact that a significant part of the shells evacuated by barges. The commander ordered me to leave again to the headquarters of the 37th Army, to inform the commander about the situation in the sections of other armies of the front, and to ensure the crossing of the 43rd and 49th Guards mortar regiments to the left bank of the Don.